Samir, what can philosophy of biology bring to medicine and healthcare?
What can philosophy of biology bring to medicine and healthcare? I'll give two examples. Many people interested in medicine have been concerned with the distinction between disease and health, and with asking whether that's an objective distinction or a partially subjective one imbued with human values.
Particularly mental health.
Physical health and mental health, one can ask that question in relation to. So in mental health, it's perhaps most acute, the question. I mean, should we think of mental illness as a real thing at all? Now, a lot of people have drawn on philosophy of biology in order to help answer that question. In particular, have drawn on the idea of function as developed in philosophy of biology, the idea that organismic traits and subsystems have functions, ways they're meant to behave, if you like, in order to illuminate the medical issue. So broadly speaking, the idea is that one can defend the objectivity of the category of disease by thinking of disease as a state of dysfunction and understanding function in the evolutionary sense as a trait or an organ or a biological subsystem not doing the thing that it's been selected to do. The second example is in the field of cancer, I think, where there's recently been quite a lot of attention from philosophers of biology who've seen conceptual questions in cancer biology and thought that they can usefully contribute to those.
How would that work?
Well, for example, in my own work, I've looked at the relation between cancer and levels of selection. So there's been a certain tendency within the medical community and also the evolutionary community to some extent to use the language and descriptors of social evolution theory to describe cancer and carcinogenesis. That's to say, to think of cancerous cells as cheating or undermining the good of the collective because they're pursuing their own self-interested short-term replication. And when the phenomenon of cancer is described in those terms, one is essentially analogizing it to the broader issue of social evolution, which is centered around the problem of altruistic behavior, the tension between individual self-interest and the good of the collective. Mm-hmm. And so I've been concerned to try and understand whether that analogy is a well-founded one or not. It may sound like a good analogy, but there's an obvious objection to it, which is that cancer isn't heritable, of course. So although a cancerous cell lineage engages in unlimited proliferation, so does really well within the organism in terms of fast replication, making more copies of itself for a short number of years, then the organism dies and the cancer cell lineage is not transmitted because it's a somatic lineage, isn't transmitted to the next generation. And that's a fundamental difference, as a number of people have pointed out, or an apparently a fundamental difference with other levels of selection type problems.
Would there be any prescriptional benefit to that distinction, to making that distinction?
I think it's more a theoretical issue than one that will have implications for the practicing oncologist. Although it should be noted that the discipline of evolutionary medicine has recently flourished and uses evolutionary principles to try and understand carcinogenesis and tumorigenesis, and does indeed have practical implications potentially for clinicians.
And there are some radical biologists who would put a lot of the disease into a evolutionary framework and to think about I've seen that recently where evolutionary theory has been radically expanded in terms of an explanatory mechanism.
That's absolutely right, and one can apply that to cancer in a number of ways. I mean, one is simply to ask why organisms get it at all. You know, why do organisms suffer from cancer? Why doesn't natural selection eliminate it? The basic answer to that is, well, because it almost always strikes after reproductive age, when there's very little, if any, natural selection pressure at all. And that's why, so it's not an accident that cancer is a disease of old age, and that's why That's why
It
natural
keeps
selection.
going on.
Yeah, but the other way of employing evolutionary ideas to illuminate cancer is to think of the process of carcinogenesis itself in Darwinian terms, and this is sometimes called the somatic evolution model of cancer, and it contains real insight, I think. And the basic idea here is that a form of selective competition is going on between cancerous cell lineages. Sometimes they cooperate, but most often it's better to think of them as competing. New mutants arise within the tumor, and then there's a selective sweep. They spread and displace those old lineages, and in that way cancer gets more and more virulent, and that explains resistance to chemotherapy, for example. One can indeed use phylogenetic methods to understand what one sees in the relationships between the different clones in a tumor. And so the point being then that evolutionary ideas certainly can illuminate cancer biology.